Where to begin? There's so much going on. I mean, there's just all kinds of activity going on all over the state. Our show is going to be jam-packed with information and important information that we're hoping the community is listening, and we want to go over a lot of things. First of all, on our show a little later, calling at 8:30, is going to be Matt Abel from Cannabis Council, also the director for the Committee for Safer Michigan to repeal cannabis prohibition in Michigan. Matt has been a tireless warrior for many, many years. I've known him as a criminal defense lawyer before the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, and he has always been the most ardent defender of the prohibition of marijuana. And we're excited to have him on the show. He's going to be talking about the constitutional amendment that has been launched to repeal cannabis prohibition in Michigan. And we're going to ask him some questions about what impact it may have on the medical marijuana community. And Joe Kane from the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association is going to be calling in to discuss that from the patient's perspective. We're excited about that. Also, we're going to have Nick Agro from Clinical Relief calling in at 9 o'clock. We had some fantastic news in the medical marijuana community this last week where the case out of Ferndale, the dispensary case out of Ferndale dealing with clinical relief was dismissed. Just a phenomenal ruling. And after all the weeks and months that we've felt such terrible pain and suffering in the court system, especially within the Oakland County system, we got a fantastic, unbelievable ruling. And we're going to talk about that a little bit with Nick. And also, likewise, at the same time this past week, a jury returned a verdict of not guilty in the Shakina Pena case. Shakina is going to be calling in at 9:30 to discuss that victory as well. Shakina was, of course, charged ridiculously for voter fraud by allegedly offering to provide cannabis in exchange for voter registration, which is simply not the case. As her lawyer at Newburgh, I think, was quoted in the paper, the jury saw what was going on and returned a verdict of not guilty. So congratulations to her, and she's going to be calling in a little later to discuss that victory. Looking forward to hearing that as well. All kinds of exciting stuff. And, of course, many of the people in the studio with me tonight were eyewitness to Michigan's first arguments about the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act before the Michigan Supreme Court. I mean, does it get any more activity in one day? I don't know. Right. And there, of course, were some very interesting comments. I think most people left thinking relatively optimistically, but, of course, reminding ourselves that whatever is said in there has nothing to do with what the ultimate opinion is going to be by the court. We can only remain optimistic and hope. All right, so that's what the show is going to be laying out. The call-in number, again, is 1-347-326-9626. I want to talk for a little while, a little rant about some things that have been going on this past week or so with me and I think things that have happened in the medical marijuana community. You know, there was a article, news, that our senator in Lansing had made some off-the-cuff remarks of a representative, a Michigan senator's PR person, and it called that woman a hooker. And the response by the representative was that I don't have the heart to tell a classroom full of girls that the same attitudes and animosity they encounter on the playground persist at our highest levels of government. My colleagues often talk about promoting our state so our economy is not incorrectly viewed as a dinosaur. But how credible can we be when our standard bearers act like cavemen? And for some reason that stood out in my mind. This same senator who made those comments was also the same senator who commented after seeing 4,000 people protesting the government's failure to implement the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act that the people in the crowd did not look like patients. I don't know if the idea that it's okay to judge a book by its cover in public is not allowable anymore, but this is also the same legislative person and is working with other groups that are trying to undermine what a definition of a patient is, I was talking about judging a book by its cover, something we're taught as youngsters not to do, to avoid. And it was commenting on how even our guest last week had commented that the people at the rally looked like people that were legalizers, or that they did not look like patients, which in a way is very, very hypocritical, because the idea that you're going to be changing the doctor-patient relationship because certification mills are not doing a proper examination and they're just eyeballing people to make a determination of whether or not they're a patient or not. In the same way, that is what was being said about the people that did not look like patients in the crowd. But moving on from that, as things go, and as many people know in the state of Michigan, the implementation of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act has been handled like in what would seem to be cavemen. There is no other way to explain it, because as we sit here and we hear criticisms of this act by legislatures and discussions about changing the law and solutions that may be made that are going to solve all the concerns of everybody, we know that those aren't true. We know that during these discussions, the real issues, such as getting the cards out on time, such as getting additional conditions onto the registry, are not in the making. We know that these suggested ways of fixing the law are never going to work unless there's a focus turned to law enforcement looking at this law differently. And there's been none of that. What we find is that I get calls still now, 3 years after the act is passed, where people have no idea where their cards is. They don't know if they're legal. They don't know what to do, and there's nowhere to call, and there's no help from anywhere in the state to assist them. And people who are genuinely trying to follow the law and not put themselves at risk, but instead just the opposite has happened. People are in fear. People are afraid to get their cards. They're afraid to get recertified. Doctors are afraid to engage in the process, because if they do it, they're going to get called into court and attacked by some prosecutor that's going to make them feel that that they're being attacked and that they haven't done something the way the government wants them to do it, when their practice has always been the same. They wouldn't have done it differently for any other type of situation ever, but it's just that it's marijuana. A client of mine today called and told me he was denied change of custody, change of visitation rights with his child, because he had a medical marijuana card at one time. He wanted to take his child on a boating excursion in another state, and the judge said, well, didn't you have a medical marijuana card? And he said, yeah, Judge, but I stopped, and the area that I'm going to be is not medical marijuana, and they're going to be got to go through customs, and it's not going to be in the boat, and there's going to be people. And he said, well, if you had a medical marijuana card ever, then you must be in such bad condition that it's going to be dangerous for you to have the child on the boat, and I'm not going to grant that. This is despite the fact that he's no longer using his card. My most recent clients that have come into my office are 60-year-old married couples that have been together for 30 years. The last conversation I had in court was a judge inquiring of me of whether there was going to be a conflict of interest counsel when there's co-defendants and you're an attorney and you're representing co-defendants and there's an offer made to one of them. You have to tell them, I know that, Judge, and that it may create a conflict if you're not representing. Judge, these people have been married for 30 years. If I was representing one of them and told them that there was an offer, they would turn to the other one and say, this is what they're talking about, honey. What are we going to do? Because it's not a criminal world. These are people. They're being dragged in as if they're criminals. And what am I talking about with the prosecutor in the pretrial room before we go into court? We're talking about how these people had technical violations. It's a technical violation. Yeah, we had to drag them in and charge them with felonies. It's a technical violation. Nothing to do, just technical. Felony cases, on bond, not able to use their medicine, as my client limps in with gout now because his entire body is acidic and he hasn't been able to use his normal cannabis to treat his debilitating condition. The conversation with officers later in the week in Macomb County, Macomb County case with the narcotics unit in the pretrial room, talking to them about medical marijuana. It's the same story. You got these people that are faking it with their back pains and this chronic pain. I said, are you aware, officers, the 2.5 million people in Michigan are treated with opiates for chronic pain. 2.5 million. There's 130,000 people on the Michigan Medical Marijuana Registry. 80% of them are chronic pain people. Do you not recognize that that is a small number compared to the number of people in Michigan who have been declared by other doctors to have chronic pain? Do you not realize it's a conversation, not an intellectual one, where we realize that marijuana does in fact treat pain and that it is not addictive and it is a better quality of life for many people, and they're seeking that and want an option at the very least. As the week goes on, you have rulings in courts restricting the presentation of the medical marijuana defense to a jury. Can't mention the card, where every pleading by the prosecutor in their facts section, their facts summary, discusses medical marijuana. That's what they were doing. That's what they were going after. This is despite the fact that the referendum, in its simplest term, its specific language, when people voted for the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, when the referendum was passed by 63% vote, they saw very clearly that this law would permit registered and unregistered patients and primary caregivers to assert medical reasons for using marijuana as a defense to any prosecution involving marijuana. And what I just told you was that they're finding ways, there are rulings that are absurd. A 70-year-old woman whose son is going to be calling, his case was dismissed. She was as fortunate, Barb Agro. After her husband died of a heart attack after their house was raided, sat through a trial. She wasn't able to mention that she was a medical marijuana patient. It's not being implemented the way that it was intended. And last week, our guest told us that the issues around the state are not issues that really are of concern, that we confirm the fact that there are no children issues that have come about despite assertions that they exist by our Attorney General, that you're not finding kids biting the heads off of pigeons in school, that communities haven't turned into, crazed, murdering cities because there was a dispensary or sick people were growing cannabis in their home and providing it to them, their sick loved one. Most of the calls, and it was confirmed by one of the other people that's in that legislative group, that the calls are coming of wanting to know from the legislatures where they should be zoning these businesses. Not there's issues of that we need to take action and prohibit it, but we learned from our guest last week that the real concerns in the Congress are things such as the budget. The battles are over the Emergency Manager Act, busting teachers' pensions, and opposing collective bargaining. That's what the government is concerned with in the Senate, the majority. And they're really not that concerned about medical marijuana because of the fact that there are no issues. They're not going to be complained to by their constituents. But we were told that when, in fact, those bills get before the Senate, they're going to pass it because our Attorney General wants them to, and they will follow his lead because they believe what he's saying is true. And we in our community know that this is not true. And as we know, Matt Abel is going to be on the show later on, and Matt and the process of what is going to be happening over the next year, next 9 months, specifically the next 180 days, is what I'm suggesting, that the medical marijuana community has a vehicle to strike back. The days of us fighting over the technical violations, the days of the government getting into the patient's examining room and deciding who's a patient, who's not a patient, can all be over. And the medical marijuana community has been pushed into a corner in that regard. And the solution is going to be to support and move forward with the repeal of the prohibition of cannabis in Michigan.